The sharp clang of the mop against the metal bucket echoed through the silent halls of the high-rise office building. Sophia Carter, a woman in her early 30s, moved methodically from one corner to another, scrubbing the marble floors until they gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Her back ached from hours of bending, but she pushed on, glancing at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Sophia thought of her 6-year-old daughter Lily sleeping soundly at home. Her neighbor, Mrs. Green, had kindly agreed to babysit tonight, as she often did. Sophia promised herself this was temporary, that one day she'd find a better way to provide for Lily. For now, every paycheck counted, every hour spent here a sacrifice for her daughter's future. Her coworkers weren't always kind. On breaks, Sophia often overheard them whispering, jealous, perhaps, of her youth and determination. "Thinks she's too good for us," they'd mutter, though Sophia never gave them a reason to think so. She kept her head down and focused on her work, ignoring the barbs meant to break her. Around her neck hung a small silver pendant in the shape of a crescent moon. It was the only keepsake she had of her late mother. On nights like this, when the fatigue felt unbearable, she'd clasp it tightly and feel her mother's presence, as though whispering words of encouragement. That night, as she finished her shift, Sophia allowed herself a moment to sit by the large windows overlooking the city skyline. The view was beautiful, a contrast to her harsh reality. "One day," she murmured to herself, "Lily will have more than this. I'll make sure of it." She packed up her cleaning supplies, grabbed her worn-out bag, and headed home. The pendant gleamed faintly against her chest, a small light in the darkness. The following evening, Sophia arrived at work to an unusual tension in the air. Her coworkers huddled in small groups, their hushed voices barely concealing their excitement. "Did you hear? Something was stolen from Mr. Bennett's office," one whispered. Sophia paid no attention as she prepared for her shift, but it didn't take long for the news to reach her. Alexander Bennett, the company's enigmatic CEO, had reportedly lost a valuable item. Security guards prowled the hallways, checking every employee's belongings. By the time Sophia reached the executive floor, her supervisor was waiting for her, arms crossed. "Sophia, a word," he said, his tone sharp. She followed him hesitantly, her heart pounding. In the luxurious boardroom, Alexander Bennett himself stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the city lights. He turned as they entered, his piercing blue eyes scanning Sophia. "We've had a theft," he began, his voice calm but cold. "And unfortunately, every employee is under suspicion. Your bag will need to be searched." Sophia's face flushed with humiliation. "Mr. Bennett, I assure you, I haven't taken anything. I don't even go near your office." "This isn't personal," he interrupted. "It's standard procedure." Reluctantly, she placed her bag on the table. The guard opened it, rummaging through its contents until his hand emerged holding her crescent moon pendant. Alexander's demeanor shifted instantly. His face paled as he stared at the necklace, his hand trembling slightly. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice unsteady. Sophia, equally confused, stammered, It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed." Alexander's eyes darkened, a mixture of disbelief and grief flashing across his face. "This belonged to my late wife, Margaret," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent. Sophia looked at him, bewildered. "There must be some mistake," she said firmly, though her heart raced. Alexander didn't reply. He turned away, his gaze fixed on the pendant as if seeing a ghost. In that moment, Sophia's life took a turn she never could have imagined. Sophia returned home that night in a daze, her thoughts spinning. The accusation itself had been humiliating, but what Alexander Bennett had said afterward left her reeling. How could her pendant, the only keepsake from her mother, be linked to his late wife? She stared at the necklace, trying to remember every detail of her mother's stories. The crescent moon design was simple, yet unique. Could it truly belong to someone else? Meanwhile, Alexander couldn't rest. After Sophia left, he retreated to his office, the pendant's image etched into his mind. He pulled open an old desk drawer and retrieved a faded photograph. In it, a smiling woman stood under a tree, wearing the same crescent moon pendant around her neck. Margaret, his wife. The woman he had lost 2 decades ago under circumstances shrouded in pain and mystery. The resemblance was unmistakable, but what unsettled him more was Sophia herself. Her presence had felt oddly familiar, her eyes hauntingly similar to Margaret's. Alexander hadn't thought about those dark days in years, but now the questions came flooding back. How did Sophia come into possession of the necklace? Could she somehow be connected to Margaret's disappearance? Unable to ignore the nagging doubts, Alexander instructed his assistant to look into Sophia's background. At the same time, Sophia's life was unraveling. She spent her days at work avoiding judgmental stares and whispers. Her coworkers, already prone to gossip, now eyed her with suspicion. The following evening, Alexander approached her as she cleaned the executive floor. His presence startled her. She had hoped to avoid him. "I need to speak with you," he said quietly, his tone less accusatory than before. Sophia hesitated, clutching her mop. "If this is about the necklace—" "It is," he interrupted, though his expression softened. "But I need to ask you something else. Can we speak privately?" Reluctantly, she agreed. In the boardroom, Alexander began to speak. His voice was steady, though tinged with emotion. "That necklace belonged to my late wife, Margaret," he said, setting the photograph on the table. Sophia leaned in, her breath catching. "The woman in the picture was wearing the same pendant." "I don't understand," Sophia said. "This was my mother's. She gave it to me when I was a child." Alexander nodded, as though he had expected her answer. "Your mother? Was she your biological mother?" The question hit Sophia like a blow. "Of course she was," she snapped, though doubt crept into her voice. Her mother had never spoken much about the past, and the memories she had were blurry at best. Alexander leaned forward. "I believe Margaret might be your biological mother." Sophia stared at him, her mind racing. The idea seemed impossible, absurd even. Yet, deep down, she couldn't shake the strange familiarity she felt when Alexander mentioned Margaret. "I don't know what you're trying to say," she said, her voice trembling. Alexander took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "Margaret and I were married for 3 years. We wanted children, but struggled. Then, one day, she disappeared without warning. No notes, no explanation, just gone. I spent years searching for her, but I never found any answers. The authorities suggested she may have taken her own life, but I never believed that. And now you show up with her necklace." Sophia felt the room closing in on her. "This doesn't make sense. My mother raised me. She was always there. She loved me." "I'm not questioning her love," Alexander said gently. "But could there be more to her story than she ever told you?" Sophia hesitated, her mind pulling at threads she'd never unraveled before. Her mother had always been protective, almost overly so, especially when it came to talking about the past. Any questions about her father were met with deflections, and the subject of family history had always felt off limits. "I don't know," Sophia admitted. "I don't have answers for you." "Then let's find them," Alexander said firmly. "If there's any chance Margaret was your biological mother, I need to know the truth. And so do you." The thought of delving into her mother's secrets filled Sophia with dread, but she couldn't ignore the questions burning inside her. Reluctantly, she agreed. The following days were a whirlwind. Alexander hired a private investigator to look into Sophia's childhood. At the same time, he shared more about Margaret, their life together, her love of art, and her gentle yet fiery spirit. As Sophia listened, she felt a strange connection forming. Though the idea of being Margaret's daughter seemed far-fetched, she couldn't deny the parallels in their stories. She began to question everything she thought she knew about her own life. Finally, the investigator returned with the first piece of the puzzle, a record showing Sophia's birth certificate. It listed her mother as Catherine Carter, but the space for her father's name was blank. It was only the beginning, but it left Sophia more determined than ever to uncover the truth about her past. Sophia stood outside her modest apartment building, the investigator's findings weighing heavily on her mind. Could it truly be possible that her entire life, her identity, was built on half-truths? She glanced up at the window of her small apartment where her daughter, Lily, waited. If there was even a sliver of truth to Alexander Bennett's claims, she owed it to Lily to find out. Inside, Lily greeted her with a wide smile, her small arms wrapping tightly around Sophia's waist. "Mommy, you're home!" Sophia hugged her daughter, grounding herself in the warmth of Lily's affection. "Hey, sweetie, how was your day with Mrs. Green?" "It was fun. I drew pictures. Want to see?" Lily bounded off to retrieve her drawings. Sophia's chest tightened. How could she bring such uncertainty into their lives? A few days later, Sophia received an unexpected invitation from Alexander to meet at a local park. His request was unusual. He wanted to meet Lily. At first, Sophia was hesitant. Lily was her world, and the idea of introducing her to a stranger, even one as persistent as Alexander, made her uneasy. But something in Alexander's demeanor convinced her. He seemed genuine, not just in his desire to connect with Lily, but also in his remorse for how he had initially accused Sophia. Sophia finally agreed, setting strict boundaries. "One meeting," she told him. "And if I sense anything off, it ends there." On the day of the meeting, Alexander arrived early, standing awkwardly by a picnic table with a small bouquet of daisies in hand. Sophia approached, holding Lily's hand tightly. "Hello, Sophia," Alexander said, his voice calm but tinged with nervousness. His gaze shifted to Lily, who peeked shyly from behind her mother. "And you must be Lily." Lily tilted her head curiously, then smiled. "Are those flowers for us?" Alexander chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Yes, they are. I thought you might like them." He handed the bouquet to Lily, who accepted it with a delighted giggle. Over the next hour, Alexander's awkwardness melted away as he engaged with Lily. They played a game of catch, and he marveled at her endless curiosity. "Why is your hair white?" Lily asked innocently, tugging at a strand of his silver locks. Alexander laughed. "Because I'm old, little one. Very old." Sophia observed them from a distance, her heart a confusing mix of emotions. Seeing Lily so comfortable with Alexander felt both heartwarming and unsettling. Could she trust this man with their fragile world? The weeks that followed were filled with cautious steps. Alexander didn't push for more than Sophia was willing to offer. Instead, he slowly began to share more about Margaret, painting vivid pictures of her life. Sophia found herself drawn to his stories, which often mirrored qualities she saw in herself. Margaret's love of nature, her quiet strength, and her unyielding kindness. Lily, meanwhile, began asking more about Alexander. "Is he like a grandpa?" she asked one evening, coloring at the kitchen table. Sophia hesitated. "Maybe," she said carefully. "We're still figuring that out." Despite her reservations, Sophia couldn't ignore the bond forming between Alexander and Lily. During another outing, Lily insisted Alexander join them for ice cream. Watching him humor her with silly faces and exaggerated praise for her artwork, Sophia couldn't help but smile. "Thank you," Sophia said quietly as they walked back to the car. Alexander looked at her, surprised. "For what?" "For being patient," she admitted, "and for treating Lily with so much care." Alexander nodded, his expression softening. "She's a remarkable child. She reminds me so much of Margaret when she was young, full of life and questions about everything." Sophia didn't respond, but a part of her began to let her guard down. As their connection deepened, Alexander made a proposal one evening. "I want to help you, Sophia, and Lily. I don't just mean financially. I want to be there for you as family, if you'll let me." Sophia stared at him, the words catching her off guard. "Family," she repeated. "Yes," he said earnestly. "I've already missed so much of your life. If there's a chance I can make up for it now, I want to try." Sophia's instinct was to push back. She had worked so hard to stand on her own, to protect Lily from the unpredictability of life. But Alexander's sincerity chipped away at her defenses. For the first time, she wondered if allowing someone else into their world might not be so bad. The search for answers intensified as Alexander and Sophia joined forces to uncover the truth about Margaret's mysterious disappearance. Alexander's private investigator had unearthed more leads, a series of letters written by Margaret to a friend named Eleanor during the months leading up to her disappearance. The letters, discovered in an old storage unit, painted a picture of a woman grappling with secrets and impossible choices. "Eleanor might still be alive," Alexander said as he handed Sophia a faded envelope. "If she is, she could tell us more about what happened to Margaret." Sophia's hands trembled as she read the letter. Margaret had written about her struggles with the pressures of society, her longing for a family, and her fear of something unspoken, a danger she couldn't name. Sophia and Alexander traveled to a small coastal town where Eleanor was last known to live. The journey was tense, filled with moments of silence as each lost themselves in their thoughts. For Alexander, the trip stirred old wounds he had long buried. For Sophia, it brought up conflicting emotions about the mother she'd never truly known. When they arrived, they found Eleanor living in a quaint cottage near the sea. Though frail and advanced in years, she recognized Margaret's name immediately. "Margaret was my dearest friend," Eleanor said, her voice heavy with nostalgia. "She was so full of life, but she carried such a heavy burden." Eleanor revealed that Margaret had confided in her about a pregnancy, one she hadn't told Alexander about. She was terrified, Eleanor explained. She felt trapped by expectations, unsure of how to reconcile her love for Alexander with the life she wanted for her child. Sophia's breath hitched. "Are you saying she left because of me?" Eleanor's eyes softened. "No, dear. She left because she believed it was the only way to protect you. There were forces at play, people who would have used her vulnerabilities against her. She loved you enough to make the hardest choice." Sophia felt a wave of emotions: grief, confusion, and a flicker of understanding. Margaret had sacrificed everything to keep her safe. The revelation shifted something in Sophia. Margaret's story wasn't one of abandonment, but one of love and resilience. For the first time, Sophia felt a sense of connection to the woman she'd only known through whispers and fragments. Returning home, Sophia struggled with how to move forward. Alexander's offer to become part of their lives felt more significant now, yet it also brought new challenges. She was fiercely independent, and the idea of accepting help, even from someone as well-meaning as Alexander, made her uneasy. During an afternoon at the park, Lily ran up to Sophia, holding Alexander's hand. "Grandpa says he's teaching me how to fly a kite," she exclaimed, her face glowing with excitement. Sophia smiled, watching them together. Alexander's bond with Lily was undeniable, and it warmed her heart to see her daughter so happy. Still, she couldn't ignore the lingering doubt in her mind. Later that evening, Alexander approached Sophia. "I know this hasn't been easy for you," he began, his tone gentle. "But I meant what I said. I want to be there for both of you. Not just as a gesture, but because I care." Sophia sighed. "It's not that I don't believe you, Alexander. I've spent so much of my life relying on myself. Letting someone else in feels like giving up part of that." "You're not giving up anything," Alexander replied. "You're gaining something, and so am I." Sophia looked at him, her defenses slowly crumbling. "Lily deserves the chance to know what it's like to have family," she said quietly. "If you're willing to be there for her, I won't stand in the way." Alexander smiled, a mix of relief and gratitude in his expression. "Thank you, Sophia. I won't let either of you down." As weeks turned into months, their tentative arrangement began to feel more natural. Alexander became a constant presence in their lives, sharing meals, celebrating milestones, and creating new memories. Lily adored him, and even Sophia found herself softening to the idea of having him as part of their family. Still, Sophia held on to her mother's crescent moon pendant, feeling its weight as both a reminder of the past and a beacon of hope for the future. With Alexander's support, she began to believe that their fractured lives could be rebuilt, piece by piece, into something whole. Months passed, and Sophia found herself adjusting to the new dynamics of her life. What had once been a solitary existence had become a shared journey, full of unexpected joys and challenges. Alexander's presence, once an intrusion, now felt like a stabilizing force. On a bright Saturday morning, Sophia and Lily joined Alexander for a day at the countryside. They explored a vast meadow, its rolling hills dotted with wildflowers. Lily ran ahead, chasing butterflies and laughing with abandon. Sophia and Alexander followed, their conversation light and reflective. "She's thriving," Alexander said, his gaze following Lily. "You've done an incredible job, Sophia. I hope you know that." Sophia smiled, touched by his words. "I've done my best, but it feels good to not do it alone anymore." Their day ended with a picnic under a sprawling oak tree. Lily curled up next to Alexander, her small head resting against his shoulder. Watching them, Sophia felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. But healing wasn't without its complexities. As much as Sophia embraced the present, the shadows of the past still lingered. She couldn't stop thinking about Margaret's sacrifices or the fragmented memories Alexander carried of his late wife. One evening, as they shared tea in Sophia's modest kitchen, she finally voiced her thoughts. "Do you think Margaret would have wanted this?" Sophia asked, holding the crescent moon pendant in her hand. Alexander looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I think Margaret wanted you to be safe and loved, and I believe she'd be proud of the woman you've become. She sacrificed so much for you to have a chance at happiness. It's our responsibility to honor that. Sophia nodded, her grip on the pendant tightening. For the first time, she felt a sense of clarity. Margaret's legacy wasn't just about loss, it was about resilience, love, and the connections they were rebuilding together. The culmination of their journey came on a sunny spring afternoon. Sophia had organized a small family brunch, inviting Alexander to join her and Lily at a cozy cafe overlooking the city. It was a symbolic gesture, a way to acknowledge the bond they had formed and the future they were building together. As they sipped coffee and shared stories, Lily presented Alexander with a handmade card. Inside, written in her wobbly handwriting, were the words, "Thank you, Grandpa Alex. I love you." Alexander's hands trembled as he read the card. "Lily, this is the most precious gift I've ever received," he said, pulling her into a gentle hug. Sophia watched the scene unfold, her heart swelling with emotion. She raised her glass of orange juice. "To family," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Alexander clinked his glass against hers. "To family," he echoed. In the weeks that followed, their bond grew even stronger. Alexander became an integral part of their lives, attending Lily's school events, sharing Sunday dinners, and supporting Sophia as she pursued her dream of opening a small boutique. The crescent moon pendant, once a symbol of pain and mystery, now hung proudly around Sophia's neck, a reminder of the legacy that had brought them together. As they walked home from the cafe that evening, Alexander held Lily's hand while Sophia carried a bouquet of daisies he had given her. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the city. Sophia glanced at Alexander and smiled. "Thank you for staying," she said quietly. "I'm exactly where I want to be," he replied, his voice filled with sincerity. And for the first time in years, Sophia felt like her life was complete. They weren't just three individuals bound by circumstance. They were a family, united by love, healing, and hope. A new chapter had begun, and they were ready to face it together. In the stillness of their shared moments, Sophia often found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought them together, a path shaped by hardship, revelations, and an unbreakable love that bridged the spaces between time and loss. Once defined by isolation and struggle, Sophia's life now felt full of vibrancy and completeness. With Alexander's unwavering support and Lily's endless joy, she began to embrace the future with renewed hope. The crescent moon pendant, once a symbol of uncertainty and unanswered questions, now rested against her heart as a powerful emblem of connection, a reminder that even the most fractured journeys could lead to a brighter tomorrow. As the seasons shifted and their bond grew stronger, they wove a story of resilience and belonging, proof that love had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Together, they weren't merely rewriting their pasts, they were creating a legacy of their own. For the first time, Sophia truly felt at peace, surrounded by the family she had always longed for. Thank you so much for taking the time to read and experience this story with us. Your support means everything. If you've enjoyed the journey of Sophia, Alexander, and Lily, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing for more exciting tales. Your feedback and engagement help us craft even better content, and we can't wait to bring you more stories that inspire, entertain, and touch your heart. Stay tuned for more. And remember, your next favorite story is just a click away. Thank you again for being part of this journey.